Menstruation is a milestone in the life of any girl or woman, a biological phenomenon that changes her body and her social standing. But what about women who lived during the Middle Ages? Knowing what we do about medieval hygiene, it's hard not to feel sympathy for them without the convenience of modern pads and tampons. Did they understand what was happening to their bodies during their period? What sort of sanitary products and pain relief did they use? Why did the medievals believe that menstrual blood was poisonous and could trigger some quite shocking magical feats? And most importantly, why were medieval women wearing pouches filled with the ashes of burnt toads? Welcome to Medieval Madness. Lady time. It's more than likely that for most medieval women, regular periods were uncommon. Peasants made up at least 85% of the population in the Middle Ages, and their tough lives meant that both men and women would suffer from undernourishment, vitamin deficiency, and exhaustion. All of these can cause an imbalance in hormones and cause periods, and according to one midwife, quote, "can sometimes flow too soon, sometimes too late, they are too many or too few, or are quite stopped that they flow not at all. Sometimes they flow by drops, and again sometimes they overflow. Sometimes they cause pain, sometimes they are of an evil colour, and not according to nature. Sometimes they are voided not by the womb, but some other way. Sometimes strange things are sent forth from the womb." This, along with having more children and breastfeeding them, which blocks menstruation and reaching menopause much earlier than we do now, meant that medieval women had far fewer periods to put up with than modern women. The curse. Although Adam supposedly ate the fruit from the tree of knowledge in medieval Catholic teaching, Eve was blamed for the couple's expulsion from the Garden of Eden. The fact that the medievals were influenced by the teachings of Graeco-Roman philosophers such as Pliny the Elder and Aristotle didn't help. Pliny believes that coming into contact with menstrual blood could, quote, "turn new wine sour, crops touched by it became barren, grafts die, seeds in gardens dry up, the fruit falls off trees, steel edges blunt, and the gleam of ivory is dulled, bees die in their hives, even bronze and iron are at once seized by rust, and a horrible smell fills the air. To taste it drives dogs mad and infects their bites with an incurable poison," as though periods were some sort of magical sorcery. This sort of ill-informed nonsense, along with the Catholic Church's institutional misogyny, helped to spread these menstrual myths. Medieval men were at best undecided about the role and standing of women, but as far as the Church was concerned, which, let's face it, was run by a lot of clerics who were forcibly celibate and likely to be more than a little sexually frustrated, women were a temptation and not to be trusted. The role of the Bible and the Church as an instigator of hatred towards women cannot be overstated. Many churchmen followed writings such as those by St. John Chrysostom, who served as an early Archbishop of Constantinople in the 4th century. He asked, quote, "What else is a woman but a foe to friendship, an unescapable punishment, a necessary evil, a natural temptation, a desirable calamity, a domestic danger, a delectable detritement, an evil of nature painted with fair colour?" It's no wonder that women were regarded with suspicion, and there was so much religious shame surrounding menstruation. The 6th and 7th century Pope Gregory the Great insisted that menstruation was the curse of Eve, a mark of her sin in the Garden of Eden, but a necessary companion to her fertility. A woman should not be deprived of attending church during her period, he said, because she, quote, "suffers unwillingly and her menstruous flow of blood is an infirmity." Strawberry Week. Other Greco-Romans that heavily influenced the lives of the medievals were the two physicians Galen and Hippocrates. Galen was accepted by the Christian Church because he believed that humans have a soul, and his writings often referred to a creator. Galen believed that the body contained 4 liquids which he named humours: yellow bile, black bile, phlegm, and blood. Any imbalance in the 4 humours was thought to cause illness and disease. To question Galen's teaching in the Middle Ages was to challenge the Church. Because a woman had a less physical role to play in a medieval family, her body was thought to produce more blood than a man, and be less capable of utilising the blood that she produced. A woman's humoral makeup was thought to make them naturally wetter and colder than men, who were drier and hotter. This was why women carried children, because a seed planted in cold, wet ground would grow and blossom, whereas one planted in dry, hot grounds would probably never even take root. When a woman ate food and it was broken down by the 4 humours, she naturally couldn't digest it properly because of her cold nature, whilst a man with his hotter character could transform a greater part of their food into humours and absorb it much more easily. In general, men were said to be stronger and have a higher moral character than women in every sense. The result was that this build-up of blood and other waste in a woman's body was called plethora and had to be ejected through menstruation so that she could remain healthy. So women were said to menstruate every month to get rid of the plethora, which also included other natural discharges such as sweat and vomit. When a woman became pregnant, the bleeding stopped because the plethora was then used to feed the fetus instead. It was also transformed into breast milk to feed the baby after birth. This also explained why periods stopped whilst the woman was breastfeeding. The breast milk itself was thought to be period blood that had gone through some sort of transformation in the body that changed it into milk. The fact that the medievals didn't understand how the female body worked was clearly a huge problem. Midwives were influenced by the works of Cyrannus, the Greek physician. He wrote a 4-volume treatise on gynecology that accurately described a woman's reproductive system. Nevertheless, it was through the teachings of Hippocrates that the medievals believed that the womb was divided up into 7 cells, with 3 male cells on the right and 3 female cells on the left. The middle cell was for a wasted egg or where a hermaphrodite child might grow. On the rag. Period cramps were thought to be divine punishment for the original sin committed by Eve. Apparently, God wanted to make sure that every little painful cramp hit home. This meant that pain relief was hardly ever offered, although women did make their own herbal remedies. Burning a toad and then wearing the ashes in a pouch either around the waist or neck was thought to ease cramps and stem a heavy flow. Ever wonder where the term "on the rag" came from? Well, women used rags to create crude sanitary pads that would absorb their period blood. These rags were often folded pieces of cloth cut down to size and held in place by being pinned onto clothing. Historians have debated as to whether the cloth used could have been cotton or linen. Many wealthier medieval women would wear red petticoats as a functional way of disguising bloodstains during their menses. Because of the shame attached to medieval menstruation and the absolute horror attached to the blood itself, women tried to hide the fact that they were menstruating. Sweet-smelling flowers and herbs would often be carried by medieval women in the form of a nosegay to mask the odour of blood. Throughout England, a plant can be found in bogs called blood moss. It is super absorbent and was used on the battlefield to staunch the flow of bleeding wounds. Its availability and absorbency made it a perfect material to use during the time of the monthly visitor. On the other side of the world, Chinese women were approaching the problem in a similar way, but instead of stuffing their rags with moss, they were using sand. Once the sand was soaked through, it was thrown away, the cloth was washed and then reused again for future periods. Aunt Flo. During the 13th century, the writings of many physicians and theologians brought up ancient arguments about menstrual bleeding as something that was, quote, polluting and impure. It was said that having intercourse whilst the woman was having her period was dangerous and harmful to the man and any child that was conceived at this time. Female genitalia didn't even have a name, and her anatomy was thought to be an upside-down, half-finished mirror image of a man's genitalia. These men clearly had no idea how the female reproductive system worked, and obviously, in knowing nothing about it, they feared it and made up stories about it that were far removed from reality. In one verse of the Bible, a false idol is compared to a monstrous or menstrual cloth that is filthy and needs to be cast away. This helped to link the image of menstrual blood as a pollutant that contained the body's toxins and excesses. Results of sex during the time of the menses could result in damage to the penis or the man becoming infected with leprosy or epilepsy. There seem to be many excuses used for the prohibition of sexual intercourses during the Middle Ages. She can't have sex because she's on her period or breastfeeding, you can't have sex because it's Lent or Easter or Sunday. Possibly a case of all the churchmen thinking, I'm not getting any, so nobody else should either. Any birth of a sick or malformed baby was used as an excuse to reinforce the link between menstrual blood and the corruption of a fetus. Even moles and growths were linked to menstrual blood. Surfing the Crimson Wave. How women in the Middle Ages coped with the inconvenience of periods is actually a bit of a mystery. Women's experiences of menstruation were just not written about, and any coping methods such as pain remedies and ideas about sanitary protection were probably just shared between women and passed down verbally. It would seem that the claims of many so-called medieval learned men about the toxic nature of menstrual blood have still not left us today. Later writings speak of how women should not look in a mirror while on her period for fear that it might crack, or walk on the grass during her menses for fear of it dying. And although opinions are slowly changing, we have inherited the Middle Ages idea that periods and the sanitary protection needed to deal with them are still an embarrassing and taboo subject for many. Thank you for watching this episode of Medieval Madness. Please do subscribe if you're enjoying these videos, and I'll see you next week for another one. Have a great week. Cheers!